Hi everybody. All right, so we're on measuring and marking, and now we're gonna look at some angles and curves. Well, first of all, everybody has a compass, and we all know how these things work. Here's a a bunch of different ones. These are all different different styles that have somehow shown up in my tool room over the years. Here's dividers, which as dividers you would use them to measure. So you would use them to measure like this, but they can also be used as a compass. Sometimes it works better to have a scribe than a pencil. And then sometimes you'll want to mark from an edge. Now, the most straightforward way to do that, of course, is just to use your body to make the marks. And this can be, this can work out really well. You just get good at it and, make your mark where you need it. That's simple. But sometimes you want more control over it. And so here's a fun little tool that's designed to make a mark off an edge. All right. Whoops. There we go. Here's another one. This is one that I abbreviated myself. This was a divider, but I made it into this, and believe it or not, the name of this tool is a Hermaphrodite Caliper. Okay, so that makes a nice, clear, easy to see mark. These are also good for, marking from curved edges, such as this. Right? Could use this. So Hermaphrodite Caliper, very useful. So those are dividers and compasses and dividers. And then there's this. This is an adjustable compass, and these are called trammel points. These are beautifully made. These are Brown and Sharp, probably from the 40s. And of course, this is just a big adjustable compass. And this one has this fabulous fine adjustment feature on it here, so you can dial in the last little adjustment with this adjuster wheel and then snug up the position of this. And you'll notice that unlike these other tools that we've been looking at, it's a little tight, but nevertheless, these are designed to be removed for sharpening, so you can get them super sharp and pointy. What a great tool, huh? Great box. All right. Well, here's one more divider made in England, this one, that snuck in with the calipers. All right, so these are calipers. These are not marking tools. These are measuring tools. And as you see, some of them are designed to measure on the insides, like that, and some on the outside, like this. So these are kind of fun to have. They occasionally come in handy. Some small and big ones of various ins and outs, all different. Here's one that's got this one is Starrett, and so wouldn't you know, it has a really cool fine adjuster. So there's two inclined surfaces there, and when you screw this one in, it pushes the caliper open and helps you fine-tune the adjustment. So if you were using these to, let's say we wanted to measure the thickness of this part, right, and pick it up there, and then you could play around with this until you got it to feel exactly the way you wanted it. And then you could take it somewhere else and measure that distance, or you could just leave it set that way and have this be a gauge that you could use to check your part to see if you had cut it to the right size. Okay. Here's a cool kind that can be used inside or outside to some extent, also with the fine adjusting feature on it and a big knob to tighten it down. Cool stuff. Honestly, I don't use this much, but every once in a while it fills a need and gets you out of a jam. That's the end of Hermaphrodite calipers, marking, and compasses. All right, so now let's talk about angles for a little bit. So to measure angles or to mark angles, there's a variety of these angle tools. These are cool because when you lock them, the lock isn't in the way. Sometimes they had, I don't have one anymore, but sometimes they had big wing nuts on top to tighten these, and they got in the way. But these are kind of great because they're not in the way. This is a contemporary tool by Veritas. Here's an old Stanley version of getting out of the way that I love. These are awesome. This is cast iron, steel. These work great. You can set them, you can vary the tension on this precisely so you can get it to be as compliant as you need it to be for your job, and then you can lock it in, and it's very firm, and you put it in your pocket, and it'll stay the same angle. Here's a cool tool that measures angles, and this one, one end of this is slotted to go this way, and then that's the maximum angle we can do here, which is what, 19 degrees. Okay. Pretty useful though for a lot of things. Nice tool, and this of course would have a head also that was a square head and a center finder head, like this tool. This normally would be a set with those three heads. Okay, here's a contemporary tool, plastic tool that's calibrated in degrees. Pretty well made, so you can measure, or this is for drawing really. Here's an antique tool. I love this tool. It's made in Providence, Rhode Island by the Brown and Sharp Company. The idea is that the outside of this circle has a tenon on it, and there's a groove in the outside part. And if you could feel how beautiful this feels, there's no lubricant in here, and yet it feels perfect. It doesn't shake or wiggle in the slightest bit, and I have no idea how they made this or assembled it. Maybe somebody knows and you can tell me. And this is calibrated in degrees and travels a little bit more than 90, so depending on how you flip it over, you could get pretty much anything. And it says down here 5 minutes, which means that this is a vernier, and it's a way of measuring fractions of a degree. So there's 60 minutes in 1 degree. When it says 5 minutes, it means that it can read to that accuracy. This is reading, if you look at the 0, you can see that it's more than 10 degrees, right? So how much more? Well, it looks like, it's almost in the middle. Well, when we look at this from 0 to 60, there's 30 in the middle, and we notice that the 30 line is lining up really well with another line that we don't care which we don't care what the number is. These are the numbers we're reading on the bottom. We're not reading these numbers. So this is a Vernier scale. So if we go to 11 degrees, we see it lines up at 60 and at 0 also. And if we go back in the middle to 10.5 degrees, we see that it's lining up at 30, which means the Vernier scale is telling us it's 10 degrees and 30 minutes, or 10.5 degrees. So then if we went like that, so there we have somewhat less than 10.5 degrees. We look and we see the line that says 15 is pretty close to lining up with some line on this scale, which means that it's about 15 degrees or 15 minutes or 1/4 of a degree. So that would be, you'd be reading 10 and 15 minutes or 1/4. So that's how a vernier works, and we'll look at those a little bit later. In the meantime, measuring angles. We're still measuring angles. Here's a kind of a cool, this could be shop made, if I'm not mistaken. Kind of looks like it was. And this is an angle gauge that you can set and use in a variety of ways. This one will measure fairly small angles. But to really measure, and one other embodiment of this, here's a Starrett thing, and this thing can really measure a tiny, tiny, tiny angle. Look at that. So, not measure, but mark or capture somehow, right? So that's for layup. And then this is sort of this is the one you leave in the grinding room and you don't care about too much, but it's pretty accurate, and it'll tell you what you're doing with angles. So there's 25 degrees, which is something that, we usually use for a chisel or a plane blade. I'm pretty good at reading that. To really be fully informed, you might want to get one of these, which is a Starrett tool, which will measure all kinds of things, all kinds of tools and cutters, very versatile, does, get into pretty much any crazy position, and if it won't get into a crazy position, you can put this guy in there, and again, this will let you not only note but also measure, since we can read on the scale here. So whereas a thing like this can mark a small degree, with this we can measure a small non-90 degree. Again, we have a Vernier scale, and I'm not going to bother trying to read it from where I am. I can't really see it that well. But anyway, you can see that this is serious business. You can read very small fractions of a degree on this scale. Okay, and it also comes with a longer blade if you're working on bigger things. So that's that. And then, kind of the modern fix-it to all of this stuff is this thing, which is just ridiculously cheap, and it is a angle measurement, a protractor that's digital. It's just almost unbelievably accurate and great. So if we zero it here, hello. Okay, there's a 0. Then we put something underneath here. It's direct reading, and so we can see that's 3/4 of a degree, 0.75 degrees. Pretty great. Whoops, it's moving around. Well, it's just showing you how sensitive it is. I'm pushing on it, and it's changing. So, very cool thing. Definitely get one of these. Awesome. These are tools that I made, and these are designed to read the edge of a musical instrument that's sitting over a piece of paper. So if you want to trace a guitar or anything else that's up in the air off your drawing paper, you can use this to guide the pencil to make the mark in the right place. Pretty cool, simple to make, very effective. So in terms of drafting and drawing, of course these are super useful. Here's ellipses and circles of various sizes, some other odd shapes. These are fun things to have at the drawing board, the usual squares and protractor squares. Again, this would be part of that group. And then these tools are curve drawing tools. These are so-called French curves. It's a classic one. And a more modern one. Those are good to have. Sometimes those are very useful. This is a more modern thing, although these have been discontinued. This is an adjustable arc ruler. So you can see that it gives you the dimension of the radius in inches, and it's pretty good. Works pretty well. Clever design based on the elasticity and memory of the plastic. So those are kind of cool. We have two of these somehow. Okay. And they're both still good. Of course, plastic being plastic, who knows how long they'll last. But on the other hand, I see my grandfather's initials on this French curve, and this looks pretty good. Well, some plastic is great. For drawing curves, there are a couple of nice tricks. Here's something. These are extruded plastic shapes, and they fit into one another and are nice and slippery so that they curve. These are great for drawing curves. You can see they're, you have to be a little a little careful, and maybe you need sometimes you need an assist for some parts of the drawing. These are really interesting. These are made of plastic and metal, and I think inside here you can see there's a piece of lead in the center, so we shouldn't be touching that. I'm not going to touch that. And then on either side of the lead is a little piece of hardened spring steel, tempered steel. And so the lead is easy to bend, and the steel will help to discipline the bend so that it's not a kink, so that it bends in a nice way. And this is a great tool for drawing. Wonderful, makes small adjustments, and to some extent it holds its shape, unlike this style, which would prefer to go back to straight. All right, so those are drawing aids. I know everybody's drawing everything in the computer, but and you can tell me it's fun and everything, but I think this is a fun way to draw too. Before we leave this area completely, we're going to pay homage to some great tools from the past, and these things are absolutely stunning. These are drafting tools that our grandfathers used. Many of these are made in Germany. These parts are made of nickel. They're almost unbelievably well made. They're just very close to perfect in every way. And they're inexpensive now. One drawback to these sets is that a lot of the parts are these pens. Here's another one. Here, let's look at this. Is a fancy one. Look at this. All the decoration and embellishment on this shank. It's got a little knurl here. It's unbelievable. Nickel, the tawny parts are nickel, and the shiny blue parts are steel. So this is a pen, and you change the width of the pen by moving the tips closer together, and then you dip it in ink, and so then the ink will kind of hold inside these two places, and when you draw it along your drawing, you get a line, believe it or not. That's some old school stuff here, but these are really cool. They're almost unimaginably well made. So beautiful. And just elegant. And every surface is a triumph. Look at these little shaping details here. Just really special. And super cheap because nobody uses them. You know, when you get a set like that, you also get things you can use. They're not all pens, although there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pens in here. 6. Anyway, these are dividers, of course, and lovely. This spring is the tool. Just a lovely, lovely thing. And then these are little hot rod parts that you can stick in here and there, depending on what you're trying to achieve. This one holds a lead for drawing with a pencil. Anyhow, and I guess, who is this? Alfred Sebald. Really loved his drafting set. These are tools that are capable of, picking up the dimension of a part by moving these little pins, so they will, quote, pick up, that is, match and remember the shape of whatever it is you set them on. Very useful, because if here's the shape you want and you want to draw it on the outside, you just run your pencil over here and you get the inverse of this, because all the pins are exactly the same length. These are great. Very useful. All right, so back to measuring. We're going to look into feeler gauges. Here's a bunch of different styles and kinds. These are a set of feeler gauge. Of course, all of you have the basic feeler gauge, which is a piece of paper, which is, useful for figuring out, how much space there is between here and there. These, of course, are precisely ground, or precisely dimensioned. I guess they're not ground, they're rolled. Very useful for determining spaces in between parts. And then here's kind of raw material on feeler gauges. Sometimes these are useful. Here's just a piece of a feeler gauge that's 16 thousandths thick. A big one. Sometimes you need to always have the same size, in which case these would be cool. And they come in different styles. Sometimes they've got a little taper on this end. Some are wire gauges, metric. Anyway, plenty of that. And then, sort of like a feeler gauge, is a shim stock assortment. Here's one in brass. And this goes from 1/1000th to 15 thousandths of an inch. And these, you know, are useful for all kinds of things around the shop, making small parts and getting a space right between two things. Sometimes you need that. And then here's the plastic version of that same thing. And unlike the brass, these are color coded, so there's a key here, and you can tell by the color of the material how thick it is. Pretty cool thing to have around the shop. All right, feeler gauges. Okay, and so now onto precision measuring. Not that this is really required for guitar making maybe, but sometimes it's awfully nice to have. For example, if you wanted to make a scribed line that was a certain height around a part, you had something flat like this, you could arrange for the scribe to be the same height as whatever it was you were trying to do, and then you know, you could make a mark around a part like this, if that was important to you. Let's look at this marking tool. This is a pretty beautiful thing. Again, Lufkin Rule and Level Company. Just, you know, gorgeous, gorgeous manufacturing, beautiful tolerances. It has a fine adjuster here, so you can see. You can turn this knob and get it to, you know, you're not going to struggle with it. You'll get it exactly where you want. And then finally, it has a groove in the middle, so it'll sit on astride a pin if you wanted to mark along a, you know, some long tube or rod. And then the other thing that's interesting is it has these two close-fitting pins, which, as you can see, I can easily push back and forth with my finger, but they don't fall out. So that's, you know, in itself kind of a cool thing. And what those are for is that it allows, it's a fence. So it'll slide along this edge of the surface plate if you wanted to make a mark on a piece of material like this. You could just slide it along the surface plate and it would act like a marking gauge, okay? And then just while they're here, these are called 3-2-1 blocks because they are, sorry metric guys, 1, 2, and 3 inches in dimension. They're kind of nice things to have. They're exactly the same size. They're precisely made. They've got some tapped holes in them so you can use them as fixtures and, you know, kind of build things out of them if you want to. And then this is a height gauge. Again, Lufkin Rule and Level Company. So with, you know, with this pin and this slide, we can arrange to make all kind of different heights to set up and measure and check things. So this might seem a little machiney to some of you people, but I'm telling you, this stuff is cool and it's fun to have. Sometimes comes in very handy. All right, so now we're going to get into the last phase over here, which is precision measurement. But before we do, I'd just like to give one more shout out. This is called measuring and marking, and boy, if there was ever anything that measured and marked, it's this shop-built copy of the Stradivari marking stabbing gauge. So this not only measures but makes a mark at the same time. Worked out great. We love it. There it is. All right. So now we're going to look at calipers. This is the oldest kind of caliper that I have in the shop, and you can see it's calibrated in 1/16 of an inch, and you can read the dimension there. It also folds out to here if you're going to try and measure something, you can, again, there's a hook. You can, add whatever this is to whatever that is, calibrated on the inside as well. Kind of cool. Boxwood and brass, very interesting Stanley tool. The next thing was a caliper like this, this one's graduated in inches and millimeters, and it also has a Vernier Scale. And really, if you're interested in this, I'm not going to spend any more time on it right now, but you could just look up Vernier measurement, and it's very clever and a robust way to do it. And when I was first doing machining about 50 years ago, these were the calipers in my pocket. So then it went from verniers to a kind of a clock face indicator, and we have an example of that here. So this is kind of a combination. It has a dial indicator, but it also has a digital counter. But it's a mechanical digital counter, so no battery is required. So there's our 0. All right, and then this will measure, I don't know what it is, 2 feet, I guess. So one of those things that gets used twice a year, but good to have. This tool. So now, of course, we have these electronic digital calipers that are great. Here's 2 different styles, and let me just tell you a little bit about these, because clearly these are the ones that we're all using now, and just a few observations. One is the size of the display can be an issue for aging people like me. When I was young, the first ones I had, I think the display was about half this high. It never bothered me. But somehow these are fun. It's nice to have those big numbers. Not that these are too small for me to read. All right, so having said that, of course there's a instant button conversion from inches to millimeters, which is great. And then these have a little lock on them, so that's useful. I'll show you why in a minute. But the other thing about these calipers that's fun is it has a hold button, which means that no matter what you do, after you press the hold button, it'll display the measurement at the time that you pressed it. So that's kind of fun if you're measuring something that's upside down and you can't read it. If you can figure out which button is the hold button, then, which I didn't. If you can figure out which button is the hold button, then, it doesn't matter when you take the calipers off, you'll still be able to read that measurement. If you don't know, and probably everybody knows this now, but there's 4 ways that these things measure. So they measure here on the outside. These top points measure here on the inside, right? This measures depth, like some of those rulers we were looking at before, so there's a depth measurement. And it also measures step measurement. So in other words, when you close them, these 2 surfaces are flush, so you can measure from this surface to the outside of that surface, say, if that was important for you to measure. That's a direct reading. Let's say we want to measure the wall thickness of this tube. So we can set 0 here, right? And then when we measure on the inside, it says negative 2.13 millimeters. It automatically subtracts the reading that we're taking now from the reading that we set for 0, okay? So this reading is the difference between the outside and the inside. So at a quick glance, we know that the wall thickness of this is just over 1 millimeter. So if we go back and zero it, and we look, yep, sure enough, just over 1 millimeter. But the point is that you can measure the thickness of something that's hard to figure. So like if we take this and call that 0, and then we do this, we can directly read that's 6 millimeters, which is, so now we're measuring the thickness of the bottom of this box without a lot of fooling around. All right? And then finally, an absurdity before we move on. So this is a kind of a modern thing to do. These calipers are designed for the machine shop. And as such, as I pointed out, they can be set for inches or millimeters. And these calipers, and this is increasingly popular now, can be set for inches, millimeters, or fractions of an inch. So when we have fractions of an inch, we get numbers like 85 128ths of an inch. I'm speechless. At any rate, that's the fractional story. This is so 19th century. I don't think anybody works in 128ths of an inch, and if you do, please write and tell us about it. Okay, so to wrap up, we're going to look at these two things, which are very useful. If you want to know the diameter of a guitar string, this is the tool for you. It's just a regular micrometer. What it is just a very, very, very accurate screw. There's an art to reading a micrometer, which I'm not going to get into right now. So if you have one and you don't know how to read it, just look up. I'm sure somebody on YouTube will tell you how to do it. And I just thought this would be fun if this works. Might not be rubbery enough anymore. It's kind of old. This is supposed to snap on here. Oh, not working. All right. But anyway, what it is a ball of known dimension, probably 200 thousandths. And the idea is so that when you're trying to measure something like this, you've got a ball on the inside and then a flat anvil on the outside, and you can direct read the thickness without, having the problem of the inside jaw not touching the center. Right? So if you put a ball in there, you just subtract the ball diameter. Anyway. And then finally, this is a depth micrometer. This is for measuring holes. So hopefully this says 0 when we put it on the surface plate. And then if we were to measure this pin goes out and tells us. Well, it's not how you would measure this. You just measure the length of it with a caliper. But what this will do is allow you to measure the depth of a blind hole. So I'm just using this as an example. Okay, so there we have it. So now we can direct read what's essentially the length of this part, or the depth of a blind hole would normally be done. And then just why not show you this department on the way out of town? Here's another use for micrometer heads. This is a very precise positioning device that, as you can see, operates in 3 axes, and with these beautiful start micrometer heads on them. You could bolt this to something, bolt something to this, and then, perhaps when you're running your optical experiment or whatever it is, you could precisely position this surface in 3 axes. So just another way that to show how measuring tools can get involved in making machinery and tooling. Anyway, I think I've kicked this pretty much to death. Hope you've had some fun with me measuring and marking. Big part of our day.